Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week, or what we're calling The World This Year. A look back at what has happened in 2016 in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph and the Daily Telegraph. Do I say it in the right order?
There is no order.
There is no order, okay.
And that is so much like our newsroom.
Well, if you want to see an orderly newsroom,
come to us.
Come to France24.com, where senior editor Leila Jacinto cracks the whip. And Patrick Smith is with us from the Africa Report. Patrick, by the way, will 2017 be the year that strong men go peacefully in places like Gambia and Congo, perhaps follow the example of Ghana's outgoing president?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like all the other strong men in West Africa are sort of combining to push out Jammeh, so I think he'll probably be gone by January. As for Kabila, I think he's going to face some serious pressure, but it's 50-50, I think, whether he survives or not.
All right.
The rest of the world isn't too concentrated on that at the moment.
We're going to have you back to see if those predictions hold true. Last year at this time, we were looking at the Syria spillover, and it was felt, Leila Jacinto alluded to it in part one of our discussion, in the form of that mass exodus of refugees. They were crossing the Aegean Sea. That route has been closed. They're moving from elsewhere. Europeans who'd prefer to just forget there's a brutal civil war now in its 6th year going on in Syria, they got a reminder at several points during the year. There was the March attack at the airport and in the metro in Brussels, with the same small circle of radicals tied to the Paris attacks and with a direct link to ISIS militants who still hold territory in Syria and Iraq. This Friday in Milan, the end of the road for another ISIS militant who, like the Bastille Day killer in Nice, drove a truck into a crowd, this time killing 12, including the driver, at a Berlin Christmas market. Christopher Dickey, beyond the fact that this highlights how it doesn't take many people to show up how much Europe is a soft target, what have we learned since the November Paris attacks? What have Europe's authorities learned when you look at what's transpired this week with the Berlin attack?
Well, I think what they've really learned is that they don't have enough resources to keep up with all the people they have to try to watch. That's why again and again we see that the people involved with these attacks were people who were in fiches here. They were being under surveillance in Germany. They were under surveillance in some cases in Belgium. And at the end of the day, they somehow duck out of sight and come back with a vengeance and murder a lot of people. Now, sometimes that wasn't the case. The driver of the truck in Nice was not under surveillance. But in many other cases, in the Paris attacks, the March attacks in Brussels, they absolutely were. And the police had this idea that they could keep track of everybody, and clearly they cannot. And I don't think that they know yet how they're going to solve that
with
problem.
the Brussels attacks, because there was this link, everybody seemed to know each other. There was the idea that, well, there was a failing there in the sense that it wasn't that big a group of people. Now with this Berlin attack, what have we learned on that
Well, I think
score?
we know, I think if you've been watching this closely, you know that there are lots of people all over the map in Europe who are willing to do these kinds of operations, and some of them know each other and a lot of them don't. One of the things we've seen really develop this year, more than in the past, is the use of encrypted messaging systems like Telegram, to a lesser extent maybe WhatsApp, where you have the bad guys in Syria communicating with people here in France or in Germany or in Spain, in fact, and telling them what to do. Here's what you do. Here's how you do it. Here's where you go. Here's what we want you to do. And some of these situations that people haven't really followed very closely, for instance, like the man in Germany earlier in the year who took a knife and axe to passengers on a railroad train, he, in fact, had been told over Telegram that he should take a car and run it into a crowd. But he didn't, because he didn't have a driver's license, didn't know how to drive a car. So this was the best that he could do, was to take an axe and a knife. But these people, they get online, they get in touch with the people in the so-called Islamic State, and there are handlers there who know exactly how to groom them and develop them over these messaging apps, and who then send them into action.
Not just there. I mean, there was a remarkable interview of the Berlin killer in the Times again, and that where the family explained, not with him, but with his entire family, he was radicalized. First of all, this is something that French Islam specialists like Gilles Kepel has been saying. They are criminals. They're petty criminals and not so petty criminals. Then they go into jail. Then they get radicalized in jail. He was radicalized well, he was certainly in jail in Tunisia. He tried to escape jail in Tunisia. He moved to Italy asking as a, quote, asylum seeker, which in itself, considering that he came from Tunisia, possibly the only democracy in the Arab world, I don't know how they accepted that.
Unrest in 2011, the Arab Spring, that's what he claimed.
Yeah, and our correspondent saying that because they didn't have the paperwork, they didn't have a formal ID, they weren't able to expel him, either from Italy or from Germany.
It is very obvious that we've been angelic about the processing of migrants. And frankly, I can understand why people will go and vote for extreme right candidates if nobody says that we have to pay more attention to this, we have to pay attention to the jails, we have to shut up the preachers in jail. I mean, you have people in jail and you do not monitor them with sound 24/7. This ought to happen. There are many things that the public will not like. There are similarities that will drive, if it is not done with the guarantees of democratic governments, we will get the populist governments that we don't like. So really, there are questions to be asked about how this could happen and how, when we had them,
I wanted to say, can I add something? I mean, we've been murderously complacent about what's going on in Syria. We've now seen the destruction of Aleppo, the absolute razing of this this city in Syria. And where have the Western protests been? Where has the Western diplomatic, security, military action been? We've presided in absentia
What's the connection with Berlin? There's a connection with the killing of the ambassador in Turkey.
I think it's part of the. I mean, we cannot discuss the individual terrorists in the Syria conflagration without looking at the wider situation. I think. Of course, it's not an excuse.
I think
they're trashing a democratic office, but I think our dereliction of duty on Syria, and that's the entire West's dereliction of duty on Syria, is an outrage. And I think we can't just discuss isolated terrorist incidents. We have to. I mean, there is a refugee flow from Syria to Europe, to the surrounding countries, which is all part of that.
I think one of the big problems actually has been, conflating Syria with this domestic problem in Europe. The images of Aleppo is absolutely riling people up. I mean, frankly, when the Russian ambassador in Ankara was assassinated, shocking and horrendous as it was, my initial thought was like, wow, Turkey has been fed so much of propaganda. They hate Russia. This is the sentiment of
and
this.
The answer is
However,
to
come back to Europe attacks, these are very much radicalized, marginalized Europeans, French. They have a couple of people coming in from Syria. The point is, even if we solve the Syrian crisis, I mean, at some point that war will fade. But the idea of jihad will continue. It doesn't take a lot. You don't even need Telegram anymore. You just take a truck and drive it into a Christmas market. Look at our Christmas markets. When I walk around Germany, for instance, I'm used to security. I've been in places.
There was a plot disrupted here in France in November that included a plan to attack the Christmas market on the Champs-Élysées. The tactics are very common. But the fact is, when you look at the people who actually do these things, usually they are not motivated by Syria. Usually they are motivated by their own screwed up little lives. They are two-bit thugs like this guy, Anis Amri. They are smarter than they're the people who think they're so smart. Why are they poor? Why are they downtrodden? Except they're not poor and downtrodden. Basically, with all terrorists, and they don't have to be Islamic terrorists, it's always the same thing. Too much testosterone, an excuse to act that is identifying with a greater cause, and then in today's world, projecting yourself on the world stage. You know that you'll be famous all over the globe instantly, if not on TV, on social media.
It's the radical Kim Kardashian.
All right. As 2016 progressed, Europe's concerns grew louder and louder over the increasing authoritarian bent of Turkey's president. Then came the July 15th coup attempt. It was about 1 in the morning. The parliament had been bombed. Demonstrators had been killed in the streets. State television taken over. Recep Tayyip Erdogan took to FaceTime to speak live with CNN Turk and to call for resistance. Anisbet Moutet, your reaction to this seminal moment that happened in the middle of the year.
Yes, there are several very good handbooks for coup d'etats, including by Edward Latwork, and they say, take all means of communication. And frankly,
it's getting complicated these
get
days.
his phone, get the president's phone. But I spoke to Turkish friends who are anti-Erdogan, and they all told me, look, this was a coup by infinitely more dangerous people. We were at the large demonstration when the coup was muzzled and we support Erdogan. This was last summer, so I don't know how they feel today. But these people who had been fighting in organizations against Erdogan for years supported him in this instance because they said these are Islamists who are literally a list of 10,000 people they wanted to shoot. This was a dangerous coup. You must not confuse it with coups organized by the army 10, 15, 20 years ago.
But the issue's been clouded by the crackdown that's followed.
The issue has been clouded because Erdogan is not a nice man and his regime is authoritarian, going into dictatorship. But still, in the case of that specific coup, they were not nice people.
These are Islamists falling out
Yes.
amongst themselves. I mean, the Gulenists were the intellectual firepower of the AKP revolution in Turkey. And they were initially the opponents of the secular military people. What's happened since then, and as Erdogan has boosted his individual power within the country, they've now found some sort of common cause with the secular guys still left in the military, and that's why this thing was so horrendous. But it's incredible in terms of the security damage this must have done to Turkey. I mean, if you're taking out 60,000 of your civil servants, a lot of your intelligence people, a lot of your military people,
and
what are you left with?
About, huh? They had those thousands of soldiers hog-tied without their clothes in the street. I mean, that's Turkey. They believe in order in a sort of brutal way.
So a bit of a vacuum underneath the upper echelons.
I would have thought just as it's been a very good year for Vladimir Putin, it's been less than a good year for Erdogan. And interestingly, I mean, just around this time, he had to sort of get back into bed, so to speak, with Vladimir Putin. And now, I mean, Leila alluded to it. You've got the assassination of the Russian ambassador in Turkey, and Putin turns up at the funeral, and Erdogan says, this is a major crisis, we've got to do something about it and launch an investigation. You can imagine how that would have played a year ago.
But amazingly, everything seems to work in Erdogan's favor. Russian-Turkish relations did not get a hammering. The Turkish economy absolutely needs Russia for gas, as well as Russian tourists. This is a very good dictator. Autocrat.
Lucky.
Wouldn't get mad if that's necessarily the case. Disruptions, by the way, didn't just come through the barrel of a gun or the ballot box in 2016. They also came through the bank sometimes. First, there was India, where the Prime Minister last month suddenly yanked 501,000 rupee notes, which make up, by the way, 86% of the cash in circulation. The idea to crack down on tax cheats, money launderers, and take vast swathes of the economy out of the informal sector. Earlier in the year, India had finally agreed, I didn't even know this, on a new national sales tax. The country didn't even have up to now, didn't have one single system for collecting VAT. What's going to be the upshot now that you've had this demonetization? How's it looking?
Look, there are economists far more specialized in this for me, and every single economist says that the economy is going to take a short-term hit. This was a measure which has to be seen politically. This was a populist measure. For a lot of Indians, it sort of confirmed their fears of what sort of expertise the BJP was receiving in order to implement this. It was an extremely secretive thing. It was passed overnight. And in an economy like India, it's primarily at the agricultural sector.
Many people still support Modi despite the hardship.
That is interesting. The people who support Modi, and this is also a phenomenon that you see in the US too, are somehow the poor who are happy to see the rich suffer. But the point is, this demonetization is actually hitting the poor much worse than the rich. Because, of course, the rich, India has infinite ways of handling corruption. You find another corrupt way to handle corruption. So this is this dissatisfaction.
Patrick Smith, I'm sure that in your illustrious career, you've been to many a conference with experts from places like the World Bank talking about
Far too
how
many.
do we get the informal sector online? How do we take the black market away and everything? Well, here's your answer.
That's that's the name of the game. In London, my local newspaper seller is from Gujarat and a great fan of Narendra Modi, and he said this is just great because it's going to force all these corrupt people to use electronic banking, and then we'll be able to work out where they get their money. It's much harder to pay a bribe with a credit card than with a rupee note. So we'll see. But I think the other thing about Modi's support base, it must be the fastest growing economy, the fastest growing big economy in the world now. It's outstripping China. It's way ahead of anything in Europe.
But growth is slowing.
For all his political intolerance, he's creating economic growth in the country.
That's going to slow down, and there are a lot of people who think that demonetization is really probably going to hurt Modi. On verra, as they say. We'll have to see about that.
Christopher Dickey, on this issue, I mean, the issue of trying to bring everybody online all at once.
Well, look, I mean, I think if you've got a huge economy like that, that's totally out of control in terms of corruption, you have to make some kind of effort to get everything back in line. And will it work? Well, probably not. It probably will cause difficulties for the economy. But God knows, over the years, we've seen lots of countries, including many countries in Europe, that eventually would take their currency and replace it and try and bring the system together in a way that they could reduce not only reduce corruption, but be sure about collecting taxes, which is the big point.
So is it better to try something or try nothing is always
No,
the
I think it's better to try something. Ultimately, the question is, how well was this done?
Yeah.
We can say it was done fairly poorly, it seems, in India. It was done disastrously in Venezuela.
Yeah, let's
but
talk.
But Venezuela is not the fastest growing economy anywhere. It's one of the fastest shrinking
Most
economies.
indebted economy.
In Venezuela, the move to suddenly scrap the 100 bolivar note had nothing to do, by the way, with bringing the economy online. Rather, it was about slowing down an inflation rate that, according to the IMF, stands at 475%. Deadly riots have since forced President Maduro to postpone the move until January. But while neighboring Colombia celebrates a peace deal with the FARC, Venezuela faces a potential meltdown in 2017. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, what do you do in this situation when you're with a country like Venezuela?
Fire the president, but that's not in the cards. This is a country which is sitting on, I think, the second largest reserves of oil on the American continent. Mm-hmm. They ought to be rich. They're not rich because they have this populist, again, but revolutionary populist strain, and they've been destroying the country bit by bit, and they had the support of the poor. There were inequalities. It's perfectly true that there were inequalities, but there are many countries where there have been inequalities which have slowly sort of brought them, made people less poor without having this kind of shock tactics. And we know that communist tactics do not work, and they do not work here.
I don't want to say to be fair to Maduro and to the Chavistas, but a huge part of it was a collapse in the price of oil. And they, like many other countries, but worse than most, because they're populist, they said, well, when oil was very high, we can buy anything. We can pay off everybody. We can put a chicken in every pot, as politicians used to say in the United States. Well, they can't afford to do that anymore. And when they discovered they couldn't do it anymore, not only was there not a chicken in every pot, there wasn't any pot left.
Yes, but most countries you know the story about Nigeria. Nigeria is a country that has been cursed with oil. And Venezuela used to be a normal country where actually oil was going to help for development, but they've become one of those cursed countries because the idea was it will be enough, there's many coming not from heaven but from the ground, and we don't need to work or to do anything that is exported other than oil. And that's the real problem, is you don't develop the economy to do anything else.
Well, that's right. I mean, but it wasn't being developed even before Chavez. It wasn't being developed very well.
When there was hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, we thought it would be the end of Robert Mugabe.
Well, I was just thinking, you were talking about 450%. That's pretty shocking. It was several billion% at one stage in Zimbabwe. I'm the proud possessor of a $5 trillion Zimbabwe dollar note.
Cool.
So it's pretty, and what was interesting in Zimbabwe is they had a coalition government in 2009, and they just one day announced, right, that's the end of our currency, and we're going to tie ourselves to the South African rand and the US dollar. And overnight, everything changed. And for a while, because they had a coalition government, it worked quite well. They brought down inflation. And yes, there were shortages of things, but it was far better than having a completely runaway currency. So I guess Maduro should perhaps take a leaf out of Comrade Mugabe's book and see what was done there.
I don't think they'll switch to the dollar.
We'll see. I was going to say.
Yeah, that looks unlikely. Maybe the South African rand or the Cuban peso.
Yeah, right.
2016 saw the passing of many a giant, including the one known as the greatest.
For this fight, I've wrestled with alligators. I've tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning and put thunder in jail. I can drown a drink of water and kill a dead tree. Wait till you see Muhammad Ali.
Leila Jacinto, the passing of Muhammad Ali really reminded us of everything that he went through and everything that was endured in those days.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was a child growing up in India, and he was a complete hero in India. He sort of epitomized everything that of the 60s and 70s that he went through. You know, he took on the white establishment. He was so absolutely full of himself. You know, this was not a sportsman who was just managed by professionals. He lost his world heavyweight title for standing up to on Vietnam, and you know, some Louisville lip. I mean, some of his what he said is just, it's a precursor to rap music, frankly. And you know, in the boxing ring, he was balletic to watch. You know, this is not a sport that I have any liking for. But Muhammad Ali, I watched everything.
Elisabeth?
Yes, strangely enough, when I was a baby correspondent in New York, I was asked to write about the possibility of his fighting against George Frazier. And so I went to the Ring magazine, and they showed me the videotapes at the time of Muhammad Ali boxing, and I realized that this was amazing. You know, it's like the greatest in ballet. You see this and you think, okay, there is something happening here that nobody can do. It was quite beautiful.
All right, he mastered the sweet science. In music, the list is long, from David Bowie to Prince to Jamaican ska master Prince Buster, Congolese king of the rumba Papa Wemba. And then Patrick Smith, there was Leonard Cohen, the Canadian songwriter and singer who passed away. Leonard Cohen was somebody who stood out in your eyes.
He was, for a number of reasons, actually, and one of them is personal, actually. When I was a student journalist, that's about 100 years ago, I interviewed him in Manchester, and there I was with another sort of scruffy guy with a makeshift tape recorder and microphone at Manchester City Hall, and he said, yeah, I've got time to speak, and we detained the poor man for over an hour, during which time we finished most of his cigarettes and drank at least a quarter of his bottle of whiskey, if not more. And he regaled us with his stories about life in Greece, his inspiration, what he thought of every rock band in Britain and Europe we could think of.
Because this is a guy who wasn't supposed to be a musician.
No, he had this incredible presence and absolutely charming. And then my girlfriend at the time came in afterwards and was totally transfixed by him. And he just has this, you know, absolute sort of old world gentility about him, but just a real sensitivity to life. And just his, you know, his history, singer-songwriter, Buddhist monk, then gets ripped off by his agent and then goes back to work with a great sense of, well, you know, stuff happens in life. I've got to go out and earn a living, and came back and went on the concert tour again in his sort of mid-60s, made far more money than he'd made before, and then elegantly, you know, takes off just before Donald Trump becomes president. What an ending.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, you had two people that you bore in mind.
Well, I was asked, you know, who are your sort of late deceased in 2016? And I said, you know, your favorite ones. And I said favorite as in good riddance or favorite as in, oh, what a pity. And I was told, oh, pick two. So, yeah, I get two. And good riddance is Fidel Castro. This is, you know, he presided over a regime that had had concentration camp for gays. He shot 15,000 political opponents. They still have those concentration camps, and they still have the opposition. They are still dirt poor. Cuba makes a lot of having the best medicine in some of the best medicine in the world. But whenever you have to have an operation in Cuba, you ask your family in the United States to buy disinfectants, scalpels, gloves, everything, because otherwise they haven't got anything in the theatre. And he was the unlikely hero of Ségolène Royal when she was the few last days
and the one you'll miss?
So anyway, Fidel Castro, good riddance. Goodbye. I'm sorry that the regime hasn't gone with him. My best is Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor was about to be 100 on the 6th of February 2017, except that possibly she was 100 already because nobody's quite clear about her date of birth. She was one of three sisters born in Budapest in 1917, so in the Austro-Hungarian Empire still. And she lived through the great years of Hollywood. She was married 9 times.
The American actor Gene Wilder, who starred in such classics who starred in such classics as Blazing Saddles, Young Frank, all those Mel Brooks movies. And you, Chris Ricky, you thought when we thought of Gene Wilder, you thought of The Producers.
I thought of The Producers because it's one of the funniest films I ever saw. And when I was living in Cairo years ago, and it was hard to come by good videotapes, for some reason I had a videotape of The Producers, and I watched it over and over and over again. My wife and I can practically recite it by heart.
And he had this angelic face.
Well, he had this, and he was so weird. But the main reason, he was just a weird, funny, awkward kind of guy. The first time I ever saw him was actually in Bonnie and Clyde, which I think everybody has forgotten that he was in that. But the reason I picked him is because I thought, who would I really miss? I mean, all these other figures, I think they're interesting. I spent a day with Muhammad Ali once, but...
Lucky.
Yeah. But I'll miss Gene Wilder. He was just fun. The idea of him was so funny. It's not an idea that I want to lose.
All right, she was passed over for the lead in the movie Casablanca because Ingrid Bergman was willing to work for half the salary. Michel Morgan, one of the greats of French cinema, who during her war years in exile in Hollywood would star opposite Humphrey Bogart in the lesser-known Passage to Marseille. She passed away this week at the age of 96, her name forever enshrined in movie history thanks to Jean Gabin's stating of the obvious in the 1938 classic Quai des Brumes, "You have beautiful eyes," he tells her. I want to thank Christopher Dickey, Leela Jacinto, Patrick Smith, and Elisabeth Moutet. Thank you, and stay with us. There's more to come here on France 24.